Hey, this is Joel Rodacker. Uh, I'm doing this presentation on the demand that's soaring for medical supplies from Fresno Pacific University, completed on March 28, 2020. This presentation will examine the supply and demand curve, the shifters of supply and demand. We will look at the long run versus short run. We will examine hard data and economic theory. The reason why I chose this subject is I'm following up on our statistics course. In the statistics course, I did the subject on emerging markets in Fresno and found that medical professionals are soaring in Fresno, the demand for them. In particular, supportive healthcare services. With the current pandemic associated with COVID-19, I became concerned with the demand for medical professionals as a whole. And as I watched the news, this concern evolved into a desire to understand the supply and demand for PPE, personal protective equipment. I have a niece who works in emergency medicine. She works in an emergency department as a nurse. And I'm very, very concerned if she has the equipment needed to perform her job. So because of that, the subject is somewhat personal to me, and this is the reason why I chose it. I'm doing this subject on PPE, in particular face mask, and the supply and demand that's associated with face masks. Prior to COVID-19, China was producing 50% of the world's face masks. They were producing 20 million a day. This graph illustrates the demand for face masks. The prices are estimates. The demand and the supply that China was producing are accurate. Regardless, this graph illustrates as prices rise, less are demanded. As prices fall, more are demanded. At $0, 20 million face masks are demanded. At $5, 0 face masks are demanded. Henceforth, we have a demand curve, and the demand curve is downward facing, illustrating that as prices fall, more are demanded, more of a product is demanded. There are different things that cause the demand curve to shift. One is the emergence of new consumers. Prior to COVID-19, the largest buyer of face masks were hospitals and medical professionals. Now, the largest buyer of face masks are consumers who are panicking, and they are actually depleting the supply of face masks. Because of that, new consumers have entered the market, causing the demand curve to shift to the right. This graph illustrates that the previous demand for face masks were at 20 million per day. The estimates tell us that we will have to increase our production of face masks by 40%, meaning we need to produce another 8 million per day in order to keep up with the demand that is required for face masks. And this graph illustrates how the demand curve has shifted because new consumers are entering the market. Now, as the demand curve shifts, it is going to have an effect on prices. We can see that illustrated in this graph. P1 was the previous equilibrium point. Q1 illustrates the quantity that was demanded at P1. P2 illustrates how the demand curve shifts, and now prices are at a higher price. And then what takes place is quantity demanded is even at a higher point, but the quantity supplied is at a lower point. So prices rise as the demand curve shifts, and until supply catches up with it, there's going to be a shortage. So there's a shortage of face masks, and the face masks that are available are now at a higher price. At some point in the future, COVID-19, the bell curve will flatten, and the demand curve will shift back to the left. We will see that at some point in the future. And this graph illustrates that at some point there will be a surplus because of new firms entering the market, more firms willing to sell at a higher price point, making an abundance of face masks. And at that point, we will see it shift back to the left. Now, opposite of the demand curve, the supply curve is upward facing, meaning that as prices rise, firms are willing to sell more of a product at a higher price. Of course, firms want to make a profit. So if they could sell an item at a higher price, they're going to enter the market in order to sell the product at a higher price. So the supply curve is upward facing, demand curve is downward facing. Before COVID-19, 20 million face masks were being produced a day by China. This graph illustrates that. Now, the COVID-19 produced a twofold problem. The demand for face masks rose, but the supply of face masks fell. We've seen in the news that when COVID-19 afflicted China, China in response shut down their market. They shut down their economy. And because China was the largest supplier, a producer of medical supplies, it produced a shortage in the market, and the supply curve shifted to the left. So the demand curve shifted to the right, supply curve shifted to the left, and that wreaked havoc in our economy. And we illustrated that in this graph. China was the largest producer. When China shut down their market, the supply curve shifted to the left. When the supply curve shifts to the left, again, prices will rise, because less is supplied and more is demanded. P1 is the previous price point. P2 is the new price point. And of course, there's again a shortage of face masks. And this graph illustrates that. Now, the wonderful thing about capitalism is as prices rise, as they are currently have risen, more firms are willing to sell and more firms are willing to produce. So more firms will enter the market. The firms that are already in the market will produce more face masks. More firms will come into the market producing face masks, and eventually the supply curve will shift back to the right, catching up to the demand. At some point in the future, we will even have a surplus of face masks and other medical supplies. Now here's my future projections for medical supplies in the face mask firms and industry. The demand for face masks and other medical supplies will continue to soar until COVID-19 is brought under control. The price for medical supplies will be high until supply is able to catch up to demand. More firms will enter the market because of a relatively low entry cost. There was an article I seen, or a news story I seen on NBC, where people are making face shields with 3D printers and taking them to local hospitals. So that tells me that there's a relatively low entry cost. So supply will catch up to demand. Some firms will create a niche in the market by creating specialty items, designer items. Somehow or another, face mask will even become stylish. Nike is already doing that. Eventually, there will be a surplus of medical supplies, and that's going to drive the prices even lower. So the question that I have, and the question that we're thinking about, will the demand for medical supplies flatten as the bell curve flattens? How low will the price of face masks go? My guess is that as the bell curve flattens, the demand for face masks will flatten as well. Maybe people will still be paranoid and want to buy them. I don't know. I don't know if the demand will take a while to catch up. It's hard to say. Is this new market for medical supplies sustainable? I don't think it is in the long term. I think in the short term, people are panicking and they're buying up all they can, but eventually that's going to die out. Now here's our SWOT analysis. The thing about face masks and other medical supplies, they are essential items. Currently there's a rising demand for them. There is a room for new market lines. As I said, they can make designer face masks. Low entry cost to get involved. Now the weakness of the market is not sustainable, in my opinion. I think eventually the demand is going to die out. There's easy entry for new sellers, so we're probably going to see a rush of new firms coming to the face mask industry, local firms, and there will be a rush of new sellers. That's going to drive prices lower, and there's going to be low profit margins. In my estimation, the face mask industry and market is more of a perfect competition market, meaning that if a company is going to want to make a profit, they are going to have to create a niche in the market. Opportunities, again, there's an ability to create a niche in the market, profit making until more firms enter. So time's running out if you want to make a profit in the face mask industry. Threats are the threats of falling prices and also a surplus of product, what will drive the profitability even lower. The demand for medical supplies will continue to rise. More firms will enter the market, driving down the cost of medical supplies. Again, I believe that the face mask industry are price takers, not price makers. It's a perfect competition market. Some firms will make a niche in the market by developing fashionable masks, gloves, and other supplies. There is a profit to be made, but again, as more firms enter, the profit margin is going to go down. And these are my references. I hope this was informative. Have a great day.